Salut, which is, of course, Welsh for Achtung, not cheers in French twice. Thanks to both Drew Pritchard and Gary Robert Jones for pointing that out to us on Twitter. Well, James Holland and I are both back at Chiswick HQ today with plenty to get stuck into. And in fact, because we're recording this in the middle of the late August heat wave, we are in my small city garden here. The only thing lacking is I haven't lit the barbecue. Otherwise, this would actually be a perfect scenario.
No, it looks great. And what's really adding to it is the line of US World War II chinos on the washing line now. I mean, good job.
I laid that on especially for you, James. But
I know that.
Before we get cracking, some stuff we thought you might be interested in.
Yes, good morning, everyone. You may have heard us extolling the virtues of the somewhat ignored Bristol Bowfighter recently. Well, Eamon Hamilton got in touch via Twitter to say, love hashtag We Have Ways, thank you very much, Eamon, and love James heaping deserved praise on the Bowfighter, thank you again. But he neglected to mention its contribution in the Pacific.
What you like.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry. Bowie was the first really good aircraft to equip the RAAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, in New Guinea, and was devastating on Kokoda and the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Well,
yeah, and I think Eamon put up a Pathé reel from YouTube about the Battle of Bismarck Sea, which was just fantastic. So all the stuff of Japanese shipping being attacked, and then the editing of the time where suddenly you've got a bloke pressing the trigger on his joystick. It's obviously none of it all happening at once, like cut together. And then at the end of the footage, there's this really brilliant bit with an American pilot and an Australian pilot, and they're sat there going, well, I think what we saw there was the virtue of teamwork. And the Australian going, that's right. And I think everyone did their bit to make it a great show, and it all went off according to plan. And it's sort of priceless, this sort of stage thing. And they're all like posed across sort of
leaning
leaning on
really uncomfortably
on ammunition boxes, smoking cigarettes. It's absolutely fantastic. Anyway, the Battle of Kokoda, Battle of Bismarck Sea, for those of you worried we might have run out of subjects to discuss and We Have Ways, not much chance of that.
We'll come back to that one.
Definitely.
And actually we should definitely do New Guinea at some point.
Yeah, we should definitely do.
I've been invited to go out there next August, which is really bad time, so I probably won't be going, but It's nice to kind of put it on the radar.
Yeah. One piece of sad news this week. The death of Squadron Leader John Hart was announced. He was 102 and was the last surviving Canadian Battle of Britain pilot. He shot down an ME-109 in October 1940 and shared in a Junkers 88. He later commanded squadrons in Burma and in Italy. Clearly a top man.
Yeah, and it just makes you think, doesn't it? Down to 4 left now from the Battle of Britain, and we're just approaching that really traumatic moment. It's a bit like Harry Patch, isn't it?
Yep.
In the First World War, and I just can't believe that there's soon going to be no more Battle of Britain.
But you're a little younger than me, James. But we grew up surrounded by a generation of people who experienced this and lived it, and now they're almost gone. It's extraordinary.
One of the ones who's surviving is Maurice Moundon, and he was actually the first ever RAF pilot I interviewed.
Really?
Yep. Back in, I reckon, 1999, so 20 years ago, I reckon. And I thought, God, I've got to get onto him quick, because, he might be dead tomorrow. But 20 years on, he's still around, and good for him. And he was just fascinating. And all of it, you can imagine, first time ever speaking to a Battle of Britain veteran. I mean, this is all brand new, it's all really exciting. And it's always a title privilege to talk to these guys. But he was fantastic. He lived in Spain, actually, so I did it on the phone, amazingly. But anyway, we also mentioned Jeff Wellham's book, First Light, recently. And if you do fancy reading a first-hand account of the Battle of Britain pilot, well, we all recommend that one. I think.
Absolutely. Now then, James, for those of our hardy band of podcast brothers, we happy few, well, actually there's not that few of you, it's growing every day, downloading this episode in a timely fashion, will be enjoying this particular episode of We Have Ways on the 3rd day of September 2019. So 80 years ago today, at precisely 11:15 a.m, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain told the nation that we are at war with Germany. I mean, we can't be doing a Second World War podcast and not remark on that, the actual outbreak.
80 years, and just the events leading up to it are just so interesting and so fascinating. There's definitely some diplomacy failures on the part of the British. They could have got in bed with the Russians when the Soviets, when there was an opportunity to do so, and they didn't. And they send out this delegation in August, a mixed French-British one, and they go on a sort of old old kind of Atlantic steamer. And it's all sort of a bit faded glory, and they get
Drax, isn't it?
Yeah, early Drax. Yes,
Yep.
Yeah, Admiral Drax. Yep, who then he retires immediately afterwards and joins the Home Guard as a private, or the local defence volunteers they first were. But anyway, so they go out there and they just completely have missed the boat, totally, and I think they're still on the way out there, or they've only just got to St. Petersburg when the deal is announced on around, what was it, the 22nd of August, I think it is. And Hitler briefs all his senior commanders. He tells them to come in civilian clothing to the Berghof down in Berchtesgaden, Bavarian Alps. And the next day, this weird thing happens over the Untersberg Mountains, which is this ridge of mountains that you can see from Hitler's front room. So he's in his kind of living room in the Berghof, he's created this vast window. It's about, I think it's like 10 foot high or something by kind of 8 foot. And the whole thing can be lifted up so you can have the air coming through. And then there's the famous balcony, where you see him with Eva Braun and Blondie, the Alsatian and all the rest of it. And right in front of you are the Untersberg Mountains, which are incredibly famous in German mythology and all the rest of it, and sort of slightly kind of steeped in mysticism. But it's a sort of the equivalent of Tintagel, I suppose, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's evening, and they know what's happening, and the decision to go into Poland has been made.
Yep.
And they're actually planning to do it, I think, on the 28th of August or
Yes,
something, before the 1st of September.
Of course, they delay, don't they?
They delay
get
by
held
putting it
up,
out, and that's because of Goering and his diplomacy efforts. But anyway, so there is this, and there's this weird aurora borealis going on in the skies, and suddenly and it's sort of red and shimmering in the sky, and the red light pours down the Untersberg Mountains, creeps across the valley, and then across all the guys standing on the balcony, and they're covered in this red light. And one of the generals turns to Hitler and says, "This time we're not going to get away with it without a whole lot of blood."
Oh.
And Hitler goes, "So be it." With a clenched jaw, turns and walks back into the Berghof. And, if you saw that in a film, you just think, bollocks, that's absolutely rubbish, that never happened. But apparently it did.
But at the other end of the scale, the Soviets have no Nazi flags for the announcement of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and have to get them off a propaganda film.
I didn't know that. That's just brilliant, isn't it?
An anti-Nazi propaganda film that films.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, because obviously we are talking about
ideologically different.
Absolutely ideologically opposed.
Yeah.
Hitler has cast Nazism as the bulwark, the answer to Bolshevism, the response to Europe's response to Bolshevism.
Yep.
He's cast the entire thing as we have to do something about these appalling Bolsheviks, and now does this backflip. And of course, it's not a non-aggression pact. It's called that, but it's not a non-aggression pact. It's an alliance.
Yes.
There's no real way of looking at it other than that. They agree to divvy up Poland. They agree to trade deals that allow the German army, the Wehrmacht, to carry on, basically the German economy to carry on, because the year before you've got guns or butter, where they're rearming so hard that they run out of foreign currency to buy butter to actually feed the German population. And so they know the whole time they've overheated the Nazis know they've overheated the economy. Schacht knows that they've overheated the economy and knows that what they've got to do is get stuff from somewhere.
And Schacht is the economic minister.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Schacht is basically the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and so you end up. This is it's not a non-aggression pact. It's an alliance.
It's a totally cynical alliance.
Yeah.
Which is temporarily mutually beneficial.
Yeah, but massively beneficial to Germany at the time.
Yeah,
because it gives Hitler a free hand. But then you've also got but then the Red Army invade Poland and they set about dismantling the Polish state.
But it also gives the Red Army a chance to kind of rebuild after the massive purges. I mean, it's like 4 out of 5 marshals are executed. Yeah. I think it's 22,500 Red Army officers are kind of arrested and executed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just absolutely insane.
Yeah, and gulagged and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because Khrushchev, not Khrushchev,
Rokossovsky.
Zhukov, for instance, has been purged, hasn't he?
I don't think he has. It's Rokossovsky.
Rokossovsky
definitely is. Yeah. He has all his teeth pulled out and his nails.
I mean, imagine coming back to all right, I'll come back and work for Stalin then.
Yeah, right. And yeah, no problem. Yeah, Operation Bagration, not a problem.
But so Britain, and of course, as you mentioned, they're going to go earlier in August, and they don't. And there is this sort of stumbling into war by Germany. And is it a bluff? Is it another attempt to win small territorial gains, but big political gains, which is what Hitler's been doing this entire time since the Rhineland? He chips away at Versailles. He knocks lumps off the settlement, and they're big political victories internally, but they're kind of regarded as cheap military victories. Which is how he gets to Poland, and then it is an actual invasion, because he doesn't have to invade Czechoslovakia. He doesn't have, none of those things have to happen. All those things he threatens. This is where he has to come good on a threat and actually see it through.
And because of his absolutely woeful geopolitical understanding, because he's very myopic, he's very kind of tunnel vision. He's very kind of, it's sort of, my worldview is the only view that counts, and therefore I think this way, so therefore my enemies are going to think in exactly the way that I predict they're going to as well. He just assumes that Britain and France, why would, if they don't care about Czechoslovakia, why would they care about the Poles?
Yeah.
And so he massively miscalculates on that one. But what is really interesting about it is that one of the big questions is, why did the German people fall for it? And of course there's a whole host of reasons why they went for this. What the Nazis are doing very cleverly in the 1930s, and they get power just as the economic tables are starting to turn after following the Wall Street crash and all the rest of it, and the Great Depression. So they come in just as the economy is just taking an upturn. So they create all the jobs and all the rest of it, and everyone sort of thinks, well, this is quite good, isn't it? And they're reinstilling kind of national pride, and everyone goes, yeah, well, I'm quite behind that as well, and that's quite a good thing. Most people in Germany feel that they were completely robbed by the Treaty of Versailles. Yeah. So Hitler taking back all these lands where there are German-speaking people, everyone just goes, yeah, bring it on. What's not to like? Absolutely. The interesting thing about Poland is the Danzig Corridor, which is this stretch of land which separates East Prussia, which is still part of Germany, and sits isolated within Poland. And the only reason it's like that is so that Poland has a little bit of seafront. But it is actually dominated by German-speaking people. And you can understand why Germans would think, hang on a minute, we want that back. That is rightfully ours. Lots of parts of Western Poland, as it's been redrawn, are German-speaking people.
Now, of course, Danzig is now known as Gdansk, because after the war, at the end of the war, Stalin solves this problem, doesn't he?
Once and for all,
by exporting Germans from this German part of Poland,
and
importing Poles from the west, from the east of Poland, and basically, because a town like Breslau, which is Wrocław now, that's you go there, and that was a Festung at the end of the war. They have Eastern Polish cuisine there, even though it's Western Poland, because the population is Eastern Polish, transplanted Eastern Polish population, though it's the west of Poland. Because you get, at the end of the war, you get these massive redistributions of population to solve these problems forever.
But there is another bigger issue that I think plays into why so many Germans go for it, and that is basic German insecurity about the position they are in the centre of Europe. They're incredibly vulnerable. They're even regardless of the Danzig Corridor or not, they've still got comparatively small access to the world's seas. They're stuck in the absolute middle of Europe. Traditionally, this is one of the most violent places on the entire planet. I mean, the 30 Years' War, as we know in the 17th century, was the most violent war ever to face Europe in terms of numbers killed to the proportion of the overall population.
And Brandenburg, Prussia, at the end of the 30 Years' War, was essentially completely depopulated.
Totally.
Because it was the cockpit of the 30 Years' War, and armies came and went all the way through there. And that's why then the Prussian state manifests itself as a military state. The army in search of a country. That idea
exactly
that it gets itself on its feet. We have to defend ourselves. We have to operate militarily, which is of course the Prussian military tradition that people talk about. The Nazis inherited.
Absolutely. But you can understand why people would feel insecure about this, because you can be attacked from the south, from the southwest, from the east, from the west. Any which way, their borders are vulnerable, and they've got a big border. And what Versailles has done is taken away that buffer zone.
Yep.
It's made them kind of retrench and feel even more penned in and pegged in. They're also very, very resource poor. They've got some coal, and that is literally about it.
Yep.
And obviously, to kind of be a big manufacturing nation, you need those resources. You need access to them. So this taking back of these lands, this expansion of the Third Reich, is all part of making Germans feel more secure. Ironically, what Hitler's then about to do is chuck it all away by entering a massive war. But you can see why by 1939 people go into it. What is also really interesting is this idea that all Germans are really gung-ho and absolutely all up for war. No one wants war.
It's a pretty lukewarm reaction,
Yeah,
isn't it?
totally. And what people want is to take back the German lands without any violence whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, of course, is that arguably Hitler's war aims are Brest-Litovsk, which is the treaty that the Russians sign in 1917 when they're knocked out of the war, essentially, and so there is a school of historiographical school of thought that says he's entirely traditional, Hitler, in one way in his war aims. Is he wants what the Kaiser wanted. He wants what the Kaiser's government wanted. He's just doing what Germany has always tried to do, which is carve some space out for, neutralise France, carve some space out in the east, so that it has this Lebensraum, which is
Yep.
Anyway, there we are.
But I've just been reading this new biography of Hitler, which I've been reviewing for a newspaper, and it's by a chap called Brendan Sims, who's a political economic academic based at Cambridge University, and you sort of think, well, that's to be welcome. That's a good thing. My God, this is a pretty hard-going, dense book, I've got to say. But his overall thesis is this: that actually, what you were saying about the ideology, that's anti-Bolshevism, that's absolutely second fiddle to his main thing, which is fear of the Anglo-American axis and capitalism and international Jewry, and that's his big thing. And actually.
But Bolshevism, he sees Bolshevism as international Jewry because he sees Bolshevism as a product of Karl Marx. Because after all, the Nazis hold the Jews responsible for capitalism and for communism. I mean, somehow.
Exactly. So what he's sort of conflating is the fact that Hitler recognises that Britain, and by association, hanging on the other side of the Atlantic, America are his greatest threat, which is beyond question. I mean, of course they are.
Yeah.
Because Britain's the biggest empire in the world and the biggest global trading empire.
Did you realise that? I mean, you read his table talk, and he's going on about the Americans don't know how to work. They don't know how to make anything any good. They're feckless, lazy people who've been polluted by their racial heritage and all this sort of thing. And a lot of the sort of casual conversation I have with Hitler talking about America is it doesn't sound. I mean, it's very interesting. It doesn't sound like that. I mean, I'm sure that he knows more. He knows more than I do.
Well, I don't think he does, because I think what he's done is he's got all this. I really don't think he does, and I think it's really interesting because you look at one of the things you always do is look at the sources of these things.
Yeah.
And his sources are all predominantly they are German sources, but original stuff that has been subsequently published.
Right.
So it's the Tagebuch and all the the war Kriegstagebuch, the war, the OKW war diaries and all that kind of stuff. Hitler's speeches, accounts of his political rants and all the rest of it. It's all that kind of stuff. All of which is great. But he seems to have read absolutely almost zero secondary sources. And had he done so, of course, he'd have realised that lots of people have been arguing for quite a long time that Britain posed the biggest threat to Hitler in 1939, 1940, and obviously America posed a massive threat. I mean, there was Stephen Bungay's book was called "The Most Dangerous Enemy," which is a bit of a giveaway in the title.
But the idea that Hitler might have held contradictory views isn't exactly novel either.
Well, this is the big fatal flaw in the whole argument. I think that it's kind of as though. You can't be sort of anti-Bolshevist and anti-capitalist Americans and against international Jewry at the same time. And of course you can.
You can if you're crazy.
You can if you're crazy. Of course you can.
Yeah.
So big fraud.
Now, because after all, you can argue that Hitler invading Poland finally gives the British Empire the pretext it has been trying to gather its skirts up. There is a feeling that obviously appeasement has failed, and by March of 1939, appeasement I mean, and even these days, I'm a little loath to use that label because that idea has been chipped away at enormously because it comes from the Guilty Men.
Yes.
Published in Michael Foot.
Michael Foot.
Writing in 1940, accusing Chamberlain of getting us in this fine mess, and the Chamberlain government, and of course he's a Labour politician. That Chamberlain national government is a Conservative government. Blah blah blah. So there's politics involved in that too.
Yeah.
Right. So there is an argument that Czechoslovakia's carved up March 39. That you get the Ismay Memorandum, which I remember being the great red herring when I was doing my degree. Don't whatever you do, don't mention the Ismay Memorandum. We were told, which is the chief of
this is General Hastings' Ismay.
Chief of Imperial General Staff writes to the Chamberlain and says, you know what? If we need to go to war, give us 6 months, and we'll kind of have things straightened out and lined up. Right in March of 1939. Of course. You're always told correlation is not causation. It's a coincidence but it doesn't half look like there is a mood in the British defence, in the Imperial defence establishment at that point. Okay, sod it, we're going to have to go to war with Germany, so we need to get sorted out. And this is the thing, David Edgerton makes this point, that there's this enormous oil refinery commissioned around then in Liverpool, world's biggest oil refinery. What's that for? Shadow armaments factories being built at this point. And of course, appeasement can only work if there is a big stick backing it in the end. All right, we've tried to accommodate you, but the appeasement can only work if it's got limits. And of course, the limitation is 3rd of September 39. We're finally the Chamberlain government's. Well, sod it then.
Absolutely. But the other thing is also it's not rearming and appeasement aren't incompatible.
No.
You can have both, and I think Chamberlain gets a really, really bad press, of course, not helped by Darkest Hour. But what's really interesting is that he's the one who resists the urges of the army to massively increase in size in the mid 1930s when he's Chancellor of the Exchequer, and says no. What we really need is a big air force, and to update our navy. And you want to do your updating of your navy, i.e., your battleships and your aircraft carriers and heavy cruisers,
as soon as you can.
Well, in peacetime, because they're the ones that are most expensive and take the longest amount of time. Once war comes, you can churn out corvettes and frigates and more destroyers comparatively straightforwardly. I mean, obviously nothing straightforward when you're building a massive great ship, but a hell of a lot easier than a battleship, of course. And all of that is incredibly sensible. And the army is absolutely outraged about this. The other thing that Chamberlain recognises quite rightly, you can only have a really big army if you have conscription. There's no way British society is going to stomach conscription in the mid 1930s. It's just absolutely no way, Jose. Also, if you have a big army, what are you going to do with it? Where does it go? The point of the Navy is to defend our overseas interests, to defend our island, do all that stuff. It's not to be a ferrying service for the army. You've got to put them somewhere. Where they're going to go.
Well, and also having a great big army can be interpreted by possible enemies as an extremely hostile thing.
Whereas building up an air force is seen as a defensive thing, and we're just protecting our borders.
And also, it's let the machine do the effort.
Still not flesh, which we talked about before. Absolutely. I just think what's interesting, though, is that I always kind of imagine, think about that amazing last weekend of the last weeks of the summer of 1939. It was an absolute scorcher. Last week of August 1939 was lovely. It was like this. Everyone was playing cricket, and and I know I've mentioned Headley Verity before, but on the Friday the 31st of August. Or rather, no, Friday the 1st of September, the day that the Germans go into Poland, is the last day of first-class cricket in this country until the end of the 1946 season. And Sussex,
what matters, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, everyone's cancelled their games apart from Sussex and Yorkshire, who are playing down at Hove. And the reason they're doing that is because it's a big benefit match for one of the Sussex players. And they go, well, okay, we'll play it. Headley Verity skittles out Sussex for next to nothing, gets sort of 6 for 14 or something. On the Saturday, the 2nd of September, the Yorkshire team go back to Yorkshire in their bus, in the team bus, driving up through England, this England that's just bathed in sunlight and just looking absolutely quintessentially, chocolate box. Sunday, of course, is a declaration of war, and on the Monday, Headley Verity, one of the greatest spin bowlers that we've ever produced, signs up and goes and joins the Green Howards. On the Monday, the 4th of September, out of conviction. Doesn't have to do it. He's not conscripted. He will never be conscripted. If he is conscripted, he'll be as a sort of PE teacher like Don Bradman or something. But he goes and does his bit.
And Blackpool, the top of the Football League. Now the thing is, of course, we've talked about all the factors drawing into the 3rd of September. What, stir the blood and snap the sinews. What does the British Empire then do to rescue Poland from its fate? And the answer is
fuck all.
fuck all.
Yeah.
And it could be. I mean, one of the colossal paradoxes about the Second World War in popular culture is we view it as this moral crusade. And luckily for us, that they are bad guys dressed in black with skulls on their uniforms, the Nazis, right?
Are we the bad guys?
Are we the bad guys? Exactly.
Yeah.
Mitchell and Webb, right? Yeah. Poland, and of course the existence of Poland is an affront to the Germans, to the Nazi government, and to the Soviet government, because the Soviets were defeated by the Poles in the early 1920s, when Poland absolutely spanked the Red Army and established itself as a free state, right? We do nothing for Poland. We treat the Poles, they get a really raw deal in the war, don't they, from us? It's fair to say. And at the end, they're tossed to the Soviets.
But again, against the wishes of the British. I mean, they're completely outmaneuvered, outbargained by Stalin and Roosevelt at Yalta. I mean, there's no early February 1945.
Because by then Churchill's
influence is waning,
is gone,
and everyone sort of goes, Churchill tossed Poland to the wolves, but it's not like he could do anything else about it, to be perfectly honest.
And
Britain sort of, no, we're going to carry on fighting because we entered this war for the Poles, and therefore we're going to keep on fighting and get what's right for the Poles. I mean, that's just never going to happen. In May 1945, we gave home to zillions of hundreds upon thousands of Poles who emigrated here. I know it's not the same as coming back to their country by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't really see what else we could have done. We were the ones who kind of sent in supplies to the Warsaw Uprising and all the rest of it. I mean,
and then the Poles get the blame for Arnhem, which is
we'll
be talking about in a few weeks' time.
I mean,
sure.
I of course one feels desperately sorry for the Poles, and I was lucky enough to interview a number of people who actually ended up fighting for two Polish corps that we were talking about the other day with the Wojciech the Bear, and it was it's really tragic. I mean, some of these guys were not going back to see their homes until the early 1990s.
Yeah.
After the end of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain come down, and their home that had been in Poland was now in Belarusia. It wasn't in Poland at all. So it is a great tragedy, but the Poles weren't living exactly in the land of the free by 1939.
Well, no, of course,
I mean,
it's a pretty unsavoury government. I mean, that's the other interesting thing is that this idea of a war of liberal values and a liberal crusade, and in fact the Polish government is pretty unpalatable, and in fact thinks it's going to be able to strike a deal with the Nazis because they agree on a load of stuff, and so the complexity of it, which I think draws us back to British government. There's your pretext. If they'd had the stones, they'd have done it over Czechoslovakia in March, but they didn't, and they hadn't quite got the Spitfires, and they hadn't quite got the stuff lined up.
No,
and so. I mean, I
don't really see what Britain could have done in 1939. I can see what. I mean, they could have sent over some bombers, of course, but really the onus was on the French because they're the only ones with a half decent army.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that we fall for the kind of German propaganda of their military strength.
Of the super war machine.
The super war machine, which they've been pumping out on the kind of newsreels and all the rest of it. In actual fact, the French could have just walked to Berlin.
Well, however,
but they don't.
There's the Saar offensive. Now,
yes,
not a lot
the
of
Saar inoffensive.
Yeah, exactly. Not a lot of people know. Not a lot of people know this, right? But the French did invade Germany.
They do, in September 1939.
Yep.
But they take their time about it. It's fair to say. So they move right up to the German border.
Yeah.
By the 10th, 11th of September, they're there. All the troops, what's really interesting is that the French troops, most of the French troops there are gung-ho, spoiling for a fight and up for it.
Yep.
They are up for it big time. I've read a lot of personal testimonies and diaries and letters and stuff of people who were there, and they're all like, yeah, let's go and get these fucking Krauts and Bosch.
Yeah.
I mean, they really, really are. And then they sit there and nothing happens, and they'll go, come on, tomorrow's the day. And then another day passes, and they go, yeah, probably be tomorrow, won't it? and then another day passes, and they're like, And by the 18th of September, they're kind of thinking, they're sort of looking at their watches going, scratching their heads going, hang on a minute, what the hell's going on here? And in fact, actually, it's all over by then.
Yep.
I mean, it's all over because it's all over for Poland, and it's not going to happen. So they're not going to be saving Poland. But the second thing is they've done the offensive, the
5 kilometres.
5 kilometres. They go
In
across.
First World War terms, that's like they're going gangbusters, aren't they? It's some sort of,
But one infantry regiment, infantry company says, X company moved across and was advancing until it was fired upon by an automatic weapon, not multiple automatic weapons. An automatic weapon, i.e. one.
Yep.
So they then fell back. So the whole of that French offensive is effectively being halted by a single German machine gun or rifle or whatever.
God, because the thing is,
it's utterly pathetic.
Because the Germans simply did not have any way to respond to an intervention from the West, did they? They wouldn't have been able to deal with it because their army, their heavy stuff's committed in Poland, and also then proceeding to dismantle Poland, to steal stuff, round people up.
Yep.
Einsatzgruppen start going in. Basically the Holocaust gets going. If
the French had gone in force,
Yeah.
it would have been all over.
Yeah.
That would have been the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
Immediately. And I know I stick the knife into the French in 1939, 1940 quite a lot, but I'm not sticking it into the individual French soldiers.
No, it's the people at the top.
It's the leadership, and this is what happens when you have a broken political leadership.
Yeah.
Because you have no military leadership as well. Because the military of the authority coming down from the political masters comes from the politicians.
Yeah.
And if you're in a coalition government where no one can agree on anything, and you've got something like 12 different political parties in that coalition, nothing happens. And the second big failing is the fact that all these senior French commanders are really old.
Yeah.
They're all in their 60s, they're
Yeah,
doddery old men, and they're just simply not up to speed. It's like, your grandma who's, what's an iPad? I mean, it's the same sort of thing. I mean, it's just hopeless.
Yeah.
And so all these guys who are really quite up for it and fabulously well equipped, I mean, their uniforms might look a little bit out of date, but they've got really good guns, really good small arms, fantastic artillery, fantastic
fighter planes
tanks,
and everything.
Marines, Dewoteens, all the rest of it, Curtises, they're not short of kit. They've also got in development the amazing, I think it's called the Block 52, which is a 4-engine bomber that can fly over 300 miles an hour.
Right.
I mean, which is just about to come out off the production lines. I mean, it's absolutely awesome. And actually, that's not till the summer of 1940. But anyway, that's by the by. But my point is, they've got a lot of really good stuff. And frankly, they're better kitted out than a lot of the German units, who are still feeling their way. There's all sorts of failures of the kind of coordination of the all-arms unit of the Panzer divisions. They haven't worked it out at all in the Poland campaign. They nearly run out of ammunition. And actually, the whole thing is very, very nearly a massive shit show for the Germans.
What they're not equipped with is purpose, which is what the Germans have equipped
from
themselves.
the top.
Purpose from the top that has gone top all the way to grassroots. So your army, your man in the foxhole's mobilised with the message from the top, and in the French army, he isn't.
Yeah, and everyone at the German leadership all recognised that an invasion of Poland was a massive risk, because by doing so they'd be leaving the back door open.
Yeah. Right, well, I think we've gnawed that bone right down to the gristle. We'll take a break. We'll be back in a tick, and I expect we're going to carry on with this. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. We're sat in my garden. I've got the sun on the back of my neck. James is still sat in the shade.
The
lawnmower, yes,
yes,
exactly, yeah. So basically, where I live, without giving it away, there's a park behind where I am, and they're mowing the lawn, of course, because we wanted to record a podcast in the garden, because Sod's Law is in full operation in W4. Right, so we've discussed how we end up with the declaration of war on the 3rd of September. But there's another declaration of war on the 3rd of September, which is France, of course.
Yes, a little bit later in the day.
Little bit later in the day.
Again, political, prevarication.
Yeah, and what you've obviously got is in London, you've got people going, the bloody French are totally unreliable, we can't get them to show up for anything. And you know perfectly well that in France are going, perfidious Albion, they are trying to land us in the merde with the Germans yet again. Look how look how they didn't pull their weight in the last war, and all, and you know that's what's going on. In Christopher Clark's book Sleepwalkers, have you read that?
Yeah.
Because he makes this really
it was one of the best of those that crop that came out in 2014.
and he makes a really excellent point that you've got everyone reading everyone else's newspapers. Right, and so the Germans are reading the British newspapers in London. The German embassy is reading the British newspapers in London and ringing up the government, going, Jesus Christ, what's going on? This war panic, and the British government going, oh, you really mustn't believe what you read in the papers, right? And that is kind of I think always it was such an interesting insight because quite clearly, you've got in the last 3 years before the war, the British government, the French government don't trust each other one bit, but are stuck with each other. So they're reading all the signs they're getting from different sources, from the papers, from what's happening in the French Parliament, and then what's happening in Parliament, and they can't come to a clear conclusion about what the other side's intentions are.
Yep.
The British are running their own, as ever, running their own thing, have their own, because in August, after all, in Shanghai, you've got a big blow up with the British embassy, and suddenly focus is thrown away from Europe to the Far East, and the British are thinking, oh Christ, we're going to have to go war with the Japanese now.
Yeah.
And that always, when people talk about the appeasement picture, they forget that, of course, the British government's looking right to the other side of the world.
Globally.
Yeah, and the main reason I remember this is because when I was doing this week during my degree, we all read our essays out about the sort of it's like they get to the top of the roller coaster at the start of August, and then whoa, down you go, and there's war on the 3rd of September. And our tutor went, well, what's happening in China at this point? And we were none of us knew.
No one knew at all.
And he did this thing and reached behind him and pulled a book out from behind his head and went, I think you'll find, and read us the cock. Right, but the French aren't dealing with that. The French they're just looking at Germany, and they're thinking, can't do another Verdun. Which is why they built the Maginot Line. They're thinking, if we can possibly avoid this, we probably will, still, at this point, aren't they?
Well, on paper, the principle is of how to stop Germany coming in and attacking them again. The principle behind it is reasonably sound. What you do is you make sure that there's one stretch of your border that they're simply not going to go across, which is the long straight bit running kind of north-south. And that's where the Maginot Line is, and that's very effective. And then the next bit, you kind of think, well, okay, we'll put enough troops. One of the big problems is that what they really want to do is go out to meet. The dilemma is, do you go out and meet any German advance that might come through the Low Countries, or do you stay put behind your French border? The problem with that is that a lot of France's heavy industry, industrial area and resources area, the coal mining area and all the rest of it, is in that northern sector. And so to stay put is a bit fraught, and they don't, for psychological reasons,
they did that before.
They don't want to have fighting on French soil again. So that's quickly kicked into touch, and they go, okay, well, we'll move into Belgium. The problem is that Belgium's neutral and saying, well, you can't move into us until such time that the Germans cross our border, and in which case there's a bit of a dash on, and that's something that's slightly anathema to the French, because they don't do anything in a hurry. The whole point is the slow and methodical, and we make sure that we've got everything backed up, and what we do is we resist, we hold the line to start off with, and then we've got all these mobile divisions that will then move up, but they're just operating at a pace which is completely at odds with the speed with which the Germans are planning to operate, and therein lies the whole problem. And the one thing that they've completely failed to appreciate is how much they're going to need modern comms in all this, and those are the fatal flaws. But the other big problem is this problem of leadership. And what is really interesting is when you look at, you start reading the kind of memoirs of people like Edward Spears, who's a kind of really important, a real Francophile and major liaison officer, and Churchill and all these guys. It's absolutely clear that at the top of the leading French leaders and the British leaders actually really like each other. There is a personal rapport there which all augurs well. They are able to talk to each other properly, sensibly, without everyone kind of blowing off and getting in strops of each other. So there is this fundamental kind of sort of mistrust of overall intentions, because they're not convinced that they're kind of mutually quite compatible. But there is a kind of personal,
because they're not.
Yes, but there is a sort of mutual respect and regard for one another, I think, which is really, really interesting, which a lot of people don't appreciate.
But I mean, you've got Churchill at the time saying, well, the French army's going to do do the fighting anyway. You know, we've got the magnificent.
Well, that was
Poilu and
absolutely,
the,
but
and the
that was
great
understood
undefeated
by the
French-
alliance that
the
they
great
created.
undefeated French army of the First World War that survived the meat grinder of Verdun and went on to triumph. Is what's in people's minds.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a standing army of, you know, about half a million with TA units mobilised. So only about 150, 100, 200 or something. No, maybe it's a bit more than that. More like 250,000 standing army.
Yeah.
The French have well over 1 million, but they have an ability because of their reservists, because you have conscription in France all the way through between the interwar years, and there's a convoluted system of being a reservist. So that immediately after you leave, you're on, you're on close reserve for, I think it's 4 years, and the ultimate reserve thing is 16 years.
Yeah.
So that means that within 48 hours they can mobilise something like 2.5 million men. You know, so that is in a different league to what the British can do, and of course they're a much bigger landmass, so they can house all these armed forces. They've got the guns, they've got 14,500 guns compared to 7,500 that the German have got, or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, so materially they're much superior.
But it's modern comms, and anyway, our contribution, the British contribution, is going to be is going to be a blockade. Naval blockade,
which they do immediately
because that worked before
and very effectively.
Very, very effectively. A few years ago, I was very fortunate. I went to Shrivenham to the staff college.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, really fantastic to pick some people's brains about Arnhem because the chance came up that I'll do it, right. And they made the point that from the 3rd of September 1939, there was a conviction in Allied circles the Germans would collapse any minute, and that basically never went away.
No.
Throughout the war, there was a conviction that at some point they're going to go, we can't win this, and there would be rational actors in Germany that would take control and throw the towel in, or that the whole thing would collapse on itself like a pack of cards. Because actually, if you look at it in the cold light of day, and this Duncan Weldon's just done this really great little series on Radio 4 about the economic aspects of the Second World War, and you look at Germany, none of it should have happened.
No.
Agriculture, for instance, isn't there.
It's
It's
terrible.
peasant.
It's
Essentially
it's
peasant
really
agriculture.
under-mechanised.
They don't under-mechanised. They don't
Too many
have.
pigs.
They don't have not enough wool. We've talked about this before, but they don't have like a mechanised agriculture like the British did, and just all these things fall into place. And so from the 3rd of September, cold light of day, dispassionate analysis of it, Germany. It can't work.
No.
Which is why also people are trying to avoid a war.
Well, and also because they don't have a merchant fleet, and they don't have a big enough navy, and they don't have access to the world oceans to enable them to fulfil the shortfall of resources that they suffer from. You know, so if Britain wants to get bauxite and copper, it's not a problem because you send a ship there and go and pick it up and pay for it in cash, and you're good to go. The Germans just don't have that capacity, and it's really interesting because the narrative of World War II is that we're all Little Britain and backs to the wall, and we're all Captain Mannerings and Private Pikes. When in actual fact, no one really thought that at the time. Everyone was a bit worried in 1940 that we might be invaded, and totally shocked by what had happened on the continent. But there was the vast majority of people had this view that Britain would be okay, and because we are the world's biggest empire ever known in the world.
The Germans,
in
the
1940.
Germans take on once America involved. The Germans have taken on 3 economies, each of which are bigger than their own.
Yeah,
2 of which are completely self-sufficient in raw materials and resources. The Soviet Union and the Americans.
Yeah,
and then a 3rd that can buy them from anywhere in the world if it needs them.
Yes.
So,
which is why, go back to an earlier argument, why Germany is going to lose from November 1941.
And so now the US, of course, because we keep touching on the US, what they do on the 3rd of September is go, we're neutral, sorry, not coming in.
Yes, but okay, so I think there's
sorry,
I'll tell you what, rather than getting bogged down on this now, let's do we can do a whole podcast on America in the start of the war, because I think it's really, really, really interesting, and it goes against the grain of what most people know about the United States. I mean, bottom line is they have the world's 19th largest army in 1939, about 188,000 men strong, which is tiny by world standards. Of 1939, and they're sandwiched between Portugal and Uruguay. They have, I think, 74 fighter planes. 74. By 1943, they're building 83,000 aircraft in the air, which is 1,000 more than the capacity of Twickenham Stadium. But in 1939, September 1939, they have
you can get
74.
that many planes in Twickenham.
You know what I mean. And you know, they've got almost no tanks. There is not a single company in America that is producing explosives at that point. Military explosives.
Incredible.
You know, so the turnaround they do, coincidentally, rearmament for America really starts to kick in from June 1940.
Yep.
18 months on, and this process is going to take 18 months because it takes 6 months to get all the machine tools made, 6 months to train the workforce, and 6 months before the production lines are starting to create stuff seriously. And you were talking about coincidences earlier on, or just but if you go from June 1940 and fast forward to 18 months, what have you got? You've got December 1941, which coincidentally is the month that America
not again.
Yeah, can you believe it?
And
anyway,
of course,
let's talk about that another
British
time, 'cause
and
it is really
French
good.
money paying.
It deserves some
But
detail.
it's British and French money paying for that startup, isn't it?
Yes, and very almost entirely British because the French are out of it by the time they really kick in.
But in '39 when it's
They're starting to, and the neutrality rules are amended in November 1939 at the urging of Roosevelt. And what they do is they say, okay, we're still neutral, but anybody
who wants
can
to buy
it
stuff
can buy it on a cash and carry basis.
Yeah.
But of course, the only country that's able to do that is Britain and France, particularly Britain, because Britain's got vast amounts of cash already in the
the
US.
Americans to say one thing and do another. Right. Well, that's it for this week. Once
We're
again,
trying to win over American listeners.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Well, there we go. I think the thing is just the issues thrown up by the declaration of war, 3rd of September. That you look back into the 30s, you look forward into the 40s. That is, there's basically a bottomless pit right there. But now,
it is so interesting, isn't
but
it?
we have to stop, James.
Yes, we do.
And we have to thank our listeners.
Basta. Anyway, thank you, everyone.
What'd you
Please
call
do. It's Italian.
I know
for
it is.
stop. Thank you, everyone. Please do keep the questions coming in to the hashtag We Have Ways on Twitter, and please do subscribe if you haven't done so already. And remember also that in September we will be featuring our Arnhem Market Garden content, which will commemorate the 75th anniversary, and we'll be doing 9 shows in a row to cover the 9 days of the Market Garden operation.
I have an idea for one of those shows, by the way. Oh, we'll get to that. See you next time.
Yep, cheerio.